Hello, this is Julie Ray, and I'm here to talk with you about graphing a line. So there are many ways to graph a line, but first let's talk about what does that mean. So a line is representing something that is happening at the same rate, either a rate of increase or a rate of decrease. For example, if you are trying to save and you start with some money in the bank and you want to know how long it will be before you can save $2,000, if you start with $200 in the bank and you can save $50 a week, how many weeks before you will actually have $2,000? That is an example of an increase at a steady rate of $50 per week. If you could increase your rate of savings to, say, $60 a week, your slope will be steeper. Your line will go up at a faster pace. You'll make your $2,000 a little bit earlier than if you only save $50. So that's an example of where we would use a line to tell us what is happening in a situation. But when we are using our lessons, we're always using very simple numbers and a very small graph, just to give you the idea of what is happening. So if we start, one way to graph a line is if we have a table of values. If you were given a table of values, you simply look at this X and Y, and it really could be any numbers or letters, variables here, but the one in the left-hand column will be your X, one in the right-hand column will be your Y, or if these are labeled, say with dollars and weeks, then that gives you the way that you would graph this line. Maybe this is going to be, maybe you're graphing the growth of a plant in inches. This would be inches, and this would be days or weeks or months. And you would graph your line based on this table of values, days or weeks or months, and then inches over here. But in this case, it's just a generic graph. We're going to take our -2, our -4, and plot a point on the graph. Then we're going to take our -2, that's our X and our Y, plot a point on the graph. Then our final point, 6, 0, and plot a point on the graph. And then we can draw our line. And I always recommend using some sort of straight edge when you're drawing your line, just to help you make sure that your line looks right and that you've plotted your points correctly. Very easy to make a mistake. So using a straight edge helps you figure out if you have gotten your points in exactly the right place. It's one of the important points on a graph, or the two important points on a graph, are your X and Y intercepts. So those are the points where the line crosses the axes. So the x-intercept is the point where the line crosses the x-axis. Notice that the y value for your x-intercept is 0 in this case, and in every case. The x-intercept will always have a y value of 0. It has to, because it's sitting right here on the x-axis. It hasn't moved up or down. So the value for y will always be 0 when we're talking about the x-intercept. The other important point is the y-intercept, and that is where the line crosses the y-axis. In this case, the x value will always be 0. It has to be, because to be right on the y-axis, you can't have gone positive or negative x. It has to be 0. Notice that this particular y-intercept, is a fraction, 3.5. And you will see a lot of fractions when you're graphing lines. It's okay, it doesn't have to sit right at a whole number. It can be anywhere on the x-axis, or the y-axis, or the x-axis, either one. So another way to graph a line is to use a linear equation. Now remember, a linear equation is always going to be a straight line because the rate of increase or decrease stays steady. It doesn't change. You may remember this kind of equation, y equals 2x minus 3. This is called the slope-intercept form of a linear equation. The m represents the slope, and this part right here is the y-intercept, or the b. So if you've seen the equation y equals mx plus b, this is that kind of form, slope-intercept. If you have a linear equation, one way of dealing with it is to create a table of values. So here's our equation, y equals 2x minus 3. You choose values for x and substitute them into the equation. So in this table, I chose 0, 1, 2, and I always recommend choosing easy numbers to work with because you want to decrease the possibility that you will make just a simple arithmetic mistake. So in this equation, I'm going to substitute these values for x into my equation and solve for y. So here's my first x value that I substitute in. Here's the x, so y equals 2 times 0 minus 3. 2 times 0 is 0. 0 minus 3 is negative 3. That's my first y value. 0, negative 3 is my first point that I can graph. And if you said to yourself, hey, x equals 0, that must be the y-intercept, you are correct. The next point I chose was 1. I substituted that into my equation. Y equals 2 times 1 minus 3. 2 times 1 is 2. 2 minus 3 is negative 1. 1, negative 1. That's my next point. The x value I chose was 2. Substituted into my equation. 2 times 2 is 4. 4 minus 3 is 1. There's my third point. 2, 1. Now I have 3 points. I can graph my line. I really only need 2 points to graph a line, but it's always a good idea to choose 3 or even more just to make sure that you haven't made a mistake somewhere. So here's my table of values that I just created for my equation, y equals 2x minus 3. So I'm going to graph my first point, 0, negative 3. Graph my second point, 1, negative 1. Graph my third point, 2, positive 1. And then I draw my line. It's not always easy to get the points exactly where I want them on the slide. So, you know, and the line is a little bit difficult, but you get the idea there. I would like to be a little more precise than that, but that's the best I can do. So another way to graph a line is to use the slope-intercept equation. And we are going to start with our y-intercept. Remember I told you that this y equals an x plus b format. The b is the y-intercept. And we remember that the y-intercept always has x equals 0. So this point, this y-intercept is 0, negative 3. So I would graph my point right here. 0, negative 3. Now I have 1 point. So the beauty of the slope-intercept equation is that it gives me a point. Now I only have to be able to find 1 more point, and then I can graph my line. Well, the slope is going to tell me where to graph my next point. So the slope here is 2. And you remember when you have a whole number as your slope, you're thinking of it as a fraction, 2 over 1. Because 1 is the denominator that makes that 2 a whole number. What's 2 divided by 1? 2. So 2, any whole number represented as a fraction will be that number in the numerator and then 1 in the denominator. So let's get our y-intercept back, and then let's find the slope. We're starting at our y-intercept at this point, and then we're going to count. Remember that slope is rise over run, so we're going to go up first. That's the y value. So we're going to go up first, up 2, and then over 1. Because our slope is 2, we're thinking of it as a fraction, 2 over 1. Up 2 over 1, and then plot the point. We could keep on going, up 2 over 1, up 2 over 1, but that will get us there. Okay, so that's graphing the line. Again, I'm sorry that my dots don't get exactly where they need to be. It's very difficult. So this is another equation that I have graphed. I have taken the slope of 1/2 x plus 2. I substituted in 0 for my x. 1/2 of 0 is 0 plus 2 is 2. And that was the first point that I graphed right there. Then I substituted in 2 because I didn't want to deal with halves. And if I knew if I did 1/2 times 1, I'd get a half, and then I'd have to try and plot a half, and that just seemed too difficult to me. So I chose another number. I chose 2. What's 1/2 of 2? 1. 1 plus 2 is 3. That gave me a second point. 2, 3. And then I chose -2 for the same reason. -2 times the 1/2. 1/2 times -2 is -1. 2 plus -1 is 1. There's my third point that I found. And then I could draw my line. So the ways that we can draw a line, let's go back and take a look. I want to go to slide 2. The ways that we can graph a line are to use a table of values and consider these our points that we then plot on the graph and draw a line. Remember that the x and y intercepts are where the line crosses the x-axis and the y-axis. We can also substitute values in for x and find y, and then plot those points on a graph. So we create our table of values if all we have is an equation. And we can also use the slope-intercept form of an equation, where we know y equals mx plus b. That b is the y value for the y-intercept. And so that point is actually 0, -3. We plot that, and then we use the slope which in this case is 2. It's the m in our equation, y equals mx plus b. And we use that. If it's a full number, we think of it as a fraction with 1 as a denominator. And so then we count up to over 1 and plot our point. And we could keep going to make sure we got it nice and straight. There's our line. Remember that the y-intercept can also always be positive. In this case, our y-intercept is the point 0.02. So I plot that first, and then I can create a table of values, or I could use slope and go up 1 over 2, or down 1 over 2 in the other direction, or keep going this way, up 1 over 2, and plot my line. Or substitute values in for x, create my table of values with my solutions for y, come up with 3 points, and graph my line. I hope that helped.